Week 4 is here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receiver rankings tier list. I bring you guys every single week on the channel, along with a few of my favorite wide receiver picks this week. But before we get into the tier list, we go through the will they play tier, and the main question mark in this tier this week is the San Francisco 49ers wide receivers. And we do have this quote from Kyle Shanahan that he expects Ricky to have a better shot to play than Jauan Jennings this week. So monitor that. If Ricky Pearsall plays, you guys will see in this video, I view him as a top 24 level wide receiver. Jauan Jennings, I currently have off. Does sound like he's more of a long shot to play. But if Jauan Jennings were to play, he would figure himself into that top 35 level range in my rankings this week. The other guy, Chris Godwin, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, finally making his season debut, but he is expected to be on a pitch count. So if you have Chris Godwin, maybe see what the snap share looks like before you trust him into your lineup. But I do think come week 6, come week 7, you're looking at a legitimate wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2+ upside. But moving on to the tier list, we start off with tier number 1. And these last couple of weeks, there was a few guys at the top. But I think, given what we've seen so far this year, it's only fitting if Puka has a tier to himself. I'm calling tier 1 the Puka Nacua tier. The wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy, and I don't think anybody can put anybody else as their number 1 wide receiver this week. It's really simple, man. He's been the clear-cut best wide receiver in fantasy so far, 24.5 PPR points per game, and now gets a very good game environment going up against Indianapolis. He's done this without a single receiving touchdown, by the way. 24.5 points per game. He has not caught a single receiving touchdown from Stafford yet, and that happens when you command a 39% target share and have over a 4 yards per route run on the season. The Colts, they're a tough matchup overall. They're third in terms of defensive EPA against the pass. But the reason why I do like this game environment is that we have a high game total, Puka Nacua is matchup proof, and the Rams are implied for nearly 27 points, which is why I will be taking the higher on his receptions. Give me the higher, 7.5. I think he can have a 10, 11, 12 reception game in this game. That's why he's the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And the next tier is what I classify as the other strong wide receiver 1s. You guys can see this tier consists of wide receivers 2 through 7 in my rankings. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Rome Odunze, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, and Justin Jefferson make this tier up. We will start at the top. Jackson Smith-Njigba did play on Thursday Night Football. 13 PPR points, and he was really uninvolved prior to the fourth quarter on Thursday night, but we saw in the fourth, when the Seahawks needed to get some drives together, JSN was the alpha on this team, and you can kind of compare his volume dominance in relation to the Seahawks, kind of how Puka operates on that Rams offense. The Rams offense, of course, better than Seattle this year, but JSN is the only other wide receiver than Puka Nacua to post over 4 yards per route run in the first 3 weeks. The breakout is here. And if Thursday night is what a floor game looks like for JSN, we potentially hit on a league winner. And then coming in as my wide receiver 3 this week, this is the biggest discrepancy from the market. But Rome Odunze is my guy, and I really don't understand what the market is seeing here. Why are we viewing him as a low-end wide receiver 1? Why, some people still have him, as a tentative fringe top 15 level wide receiver. Like, guys, we need to adjust our expectations on Rome Odunze. This is an alpha level second-year breakout. He's averaging over 20 PPR points per game so far, and now gets a smash game environment going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Guys, 4th highest game total of the week, 3rd fastest projected pace. The Raiders-Bears represent a complete eruption spot. Obviously, we know with the Bears defense, missing 3 of their 4 top corners. I'll talk about Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker later in this video. But to me, you're getting the alpha of this Bears passing attack for a quarterback that's played extremely well with Caleb Williams. I think we continue to see this upward trajectory, and I think Rome Odunze has another monster week en route to a top 5 level finish this season. And Odunze has elite touchdown equity on a 23-point implied Bears offense, not to mention a 28% target share this year. The volume is there, and that is why I love the higher on his yards this week. Give me the higher, 62.5. I think we see the year 2 breakout continue for Rome this week, my wide receiver 3. And at wide receiver 4, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions, going up against the Cleveland Browns. Detroit, 27.25 implied points in this game. Amon-Ra St. Brown currently the wide receiver 2 in fantasy at 22.8 points per game. And with Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's posted a 27% target share on a Detroit offense that hasn't skipped a beat, man. These last couple weeks, Detroit, the Lions offense, they have looked extremely strong. And John Morton is looking like a perfectly qualified replacement for Ben Johnson. With Cleveland, they are a pass funnel defense. You cannot run the ball on the Cleveland Browns, but you can throw the ball against them. And to me, when I'm looking at it, you got a defense that's number 5 in EPA against the run, but bottom 10 against the pass. we should see the Lions come out and throw the ball in this game, and I think St. Brown continues to be the alpha of this offense. A wide receiver 5, we have Malik Neighbors of the New York Giants going to play the LA Chargers at home this week, and it was a very down game against the Chiefs, don't get me wrong, but Russell Wilson completely crumbled under that Sunday Night Football spotlight, and now the Giants are turning towards Jackson Dart in week 4. And even despite that bad game in week 3, we have Malik Neighbors averaging roughly 18 points per game and has 32 targets in his first 3 games. But Jackson Dart provides significant upside for Neighbors at quarterback, even despite a lower implied team total this week. To me, week 3 was a blip under the radar for one of the premier wide receiver talents in the league. You can't teach this type of volume, and Malik Neighbors is the type of player that can take any touch to the house. A wide receiver 6, we have Nico Collins of the Houston Texans going to play the Tennessee Titans at home this week. And with Nico Collins, you have 20 targets and 18.3 points per game in his last 2. After that bad game we saw in week 1, Nico Collins, he looks back despite the Texans passing offense struggling so far this year. With Nico, he is the clear alpha level target. And with how the Texans have looked on offense, his best path moving forward is the Malik Neighbors way. You're an elite talent. There's not too much significant target competition in Houston, and I expect the involvement to continue moving forward. Don't get me wrong, it's not a great game environment for Nico Collins, but he has commanded over 30% of the team targets in back-to-back weeks. And it's clear to me that the only thing that CJ Stroud trusts on this offense right now is number 12 on the boundary. I do think with Nico Collins, you get a premier talent. Now you're getting premier volume. He is a mid-end wide receiver 1 with high-end wide receiver 1 upside should the Texans figure it out. And then finally at wide receiver 7 here, we have Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings playing in that Dublin, Ireland game, 9:30 a.m. kickoff on Sunday morning. With Justin Jefferson, man, I'm a little bit worried about the game environment simply because of the kickoff. 9:30 a.m., you typically see slugfests. That's what's concerning me. We have the second worst game environment of the week at a 40.5 over-under, and I'm very curious if the Vikings can keep up the performance we saw against the Cincinnati Bengals. However, Pittsburgh, they are a pass funnel defense, and Carson Wentz played well against the Bengals last week. With Jefferson, sure, he's only at 12.8 points per game, but he has been commanding a 32% target share for this Vikings offense, and let's hope in a 2.5-point spread, we see more natural passing volume for Minnesota this week. But moving on to the low-end wide receiver 1s, we start off with my wide receiver 8 this week, Drake London, followed by at 9, George Pickens, at 10, Garrett Wilson, 11, Devontae Adams, and my wide receiver 12 being Jamar Chase going into week 4. I'll start off at the top, Drake London coming in at 8, going to play the Washington Commanders. We see for the Falcons this week, 22 implied points at home against Washington. And for Drake London, he hasn't popped in the box score just yet, only 9.97 PPR points per game like you can see. He's only the wide receiver 46 in fantasy, but this feels like a get-right spot going up against Washington. So far this year, 9 targets per game, and Penix should be much better than he was last week. On top of that, when you look at the 3 games that they started together last season, he posted 59 receiving yards, 106 receiving yards, and 187 receiving yards in those 3 games. I think the connection's going to be there. I think we're going to have a bounce back after that shutout against the Panthers. And I think Drake London is going to show people why he was a second-round pick in fantasy. And not to mention, with Darnell Mooney potentially fully healthy in this game, maybe we start to see more slot snaps from Drake London. Big part of his game last year. We haven't seen the usage be quite there this year yet. And at wide receiver 9, maybe shocking some people here, but George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys, yes, despite a tough matchup against the Packers, he is a top 10 wide receiver for me this week. And it's pretty simple, man. With Dak Prescott, you saw 42 pass attempts per game in the first 3 games. And without CeeDee Lamb in the lineup, Pickens has a huge opportunity as the wide receiver 1 in Dallas. Ferguson, he will get his. He is one of the highest utilized tight ends in the league so far. But Pickens has a chance at 25 to 30% target share on a high volume passing offense. And on top of that, man, he has big play upside. He has shown these last 2 weeks he has touchdown equity on this offense. And he has a strong rapport with Dak Prescott already. Yes, like I said, very tough matchup. Green Bay has been stingy against wide receivers, but I'm trusting a good player in a high upside volume spot to get there this week. Play Pickens, wide receiver 1 level confidence, double-digit targets going up against Green Bay. And at wide receiver 10, we have Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. He's the wide receiver 7 in PPR points per game this year, and now we'll more than likely get Justin Fields back into the lineup. Actually, I think by the time I'm recording this, Justin Fields is going to be a full go for Monday Night Football, as reported from Aaron Glenn. And if that is the case, you are getting your starting quarterback back. in a matchup against the single worst defense against the pass this year with Miami. I can't quite get Garrett Wilson into tier 2, but I wouldn't be shocked if he had another 10 plus target, 20 plus PPR point week, just like he did last week against Tampa Bay. The one concern that I do have is maybe we see the offense plateau. We kind of saw those signs in week 2. That's the only reason why Garrett Wilson isn't in that second tier. And assuming he doesn't pull a Russell Wilson from Sunday Night Football, I have wide receiver 1 level faith in Garrett Wilson right now. Next up at wide receiver 11, we have Davante Adams of the LA Rams going up against the Indianapolis Colts. And according to Sean McVay, Davante Adams is not expected to be on a pitch count in this game, and he is ruled in against the Colts this week. He's been the main beneficiary for an extremely concentrated passing attack in LA. Yes, we know Puka, he is the clear wide receiver 1 in fantasy, but Davante Adams is commanding wide receiver 1 level volume, and the Rams funneled the majority of their passing attack through these 2 outside wide receivers. With Davante Adams, 29 targets in these first 3 games, and a 26.5 implied point offense with the Rams this week against Indianapolis, assuming he is a full go, which it sounds like he is a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And he comes ahead of Jamar Chase at number 12 this week, with Jamar Chase going on the road to play the Denver Broncos. I'm a little bit concerned here because, again, Jamar Chase, the God-given ability, the overall volume he has in this offense, I think he needs to be ranked in the top 12. But this is a very bad matchup for him. We do have Pat Surtain on the other side, but more importantly, we only have 18.5 implied points for the Cincinnati Bengals. Man, if he's going to get shadowed by Pat Surtain, if Jake Browning's not going to be able to put up points on their offensive end, I have significant worries for this passing offense. Again, I will give Jamar Chase his respect. He can take any touch to the house, and he should be able to get 8+ targets in this game. But because of my worries of Jake Browning, give me the lower on his receiving yards, 65.5. We take the lower over on underdog this week. Moving on to the high-end wide receiver 2s, we start off with 13, Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 14, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos, 15, we have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. And at 16, we have Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll start off at the top. Emeka Egbuka going up against Philadelphia. With Emeka Egbuka in his first 3 games as a professional, we have 17 points per game and 3 touchdowns. And most important, we saw the most volume for him come in week 3. We go into week 4. Mike Evans, he will not play in this game, dealing with that hamstring injury he suffered last week. And Chris Godwin, while he's slated to make his debut this week, he is expected to be on a pitch count. So when it comes down to it, the Bucs, they haven't shown the ability to consistently run the football this year. The Eagles front, they have been one of the best run defending defenses in the last 2 years in the NFL. When I'm looking at this matchup, the only real source of Bucs offense I can see is Emeka Egbuka on the perimeter. I'm expecting 10+ targets. It is a very difficult matchup against Philadelphia, but Emeka Egbuka looks like a great player, and Tampa Bay has shown in the last 2 years that they will be able to throw the football irregardless of the injuries. Wide receiver 14, we have Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos on the flip side of that game Monday night going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And Sutton, he was bad in week 2, don't get me wrong, but he scored over 18 PPR points in 2 of his 3 games this year. In weeks 1 and 3, he was able to do that in both, and now he has a smash spot going up against the Bengals. With Denver, they implied for 26 points at home, and like I said with Sutton, he has scored 2 touchdowns in his first 3 games. When I'm looking at this, sure, Troy Franklin, he might be a factor on the outside. Like we saw in week 2, Franklin showed that he has an incredibly high ceiling. However, Sutton is still the clear number 1 wide receiver here, and the Bengals secondary is extremely exploitable. And with Sutton, his main risk is that Bo Nix simply hasn't looked like himself to start the season. However, he has touchdown equity in this offense, and he is the clear number 1 target, which makes him a high-end wide receiver 2 in spite of that. Number 15, we have A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles going to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road, and with A.J. Brown, he bounced back in a big way in week 3. 6 catches, 109 yards, and a receiving touchdown, 22.9 PPR points for A.J. Brown. And there's definitely upside that the Eagles' pass volume mirrors what we saw last week. The Bucs, they are one of the most pass funnel defenses in the league. However, I still have my skepticism. When I'm looking at this Eagles passing offense, they only have 2 games with 30+ pass attempts since week 6 of last year. They clearly want to run the football. And while Brown is still an alpha level wide receiver, if the Eagles throw the football only 22 times for 175 passing yards, it's hard to have consistent wide receiver 1 production. So I'd more so categorize A.J. Brown as a boom bust wide receiver 2 for the time being. And speaking of A.J. Brown having his big game, my wide receiver 16 hasn't had his big game. Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars, very tough matchup going on the road against San Francisco, and he's been awful to start the year. However, when you look at the nuts and bolts, he's commanded 25 targets, and the Jaguars are currently number 3 in expected wide receiver points so far this year. Don't get me wrong, like I said, the 49ers are very good at stopping opposing wide receivers, but they just lost Nick Bosa for the year, and BTJ is simply due for a bounce back. He's not this bad at football, and this was still the wide receiver who in his rookie year after the bye week averaged 23 points per game. So again, he's risky. If you have BTJ, you're probably pissed off to start the year, but trust the process. The volume's there. The talent is there. He just simply needs to play better. And because I play against him in the Flock League, this seems like the bounce back week for him. But moving on to the next tier, we have my wide receivers 17 through 23. Zay Flowers, Ladd McConkey, Tetairoa McMillan, Jacoby Myers, Tyreek Hill, Ricky Pearsall. Again, I alluded to it in the top if he does play top 24 wide receiver. And Chris Olave this week. We'll start off at the top. Wide receiver 17, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, going to play the Kansas City Chiefs on the road. And with Zay Flowers, he's a very weird evaluation after 3 weeks. Like on one hand, we saw a legit alpha wide receiver in the first 2 games. And then he reverts back in week 3 to the volatility that we've seen plague him in his rookie and sophomore seasons. With Zay Flowers, you want to believe what you saw in the first 2 weeks. But in week 3, Andrews looked much better. I'm curious if their usage in the offense is negatively correlated moving forward. If Andrews going to have his big weeks, does it directly impact Zay Flowers, and vice versa? If Zay Flowers has his big weeks, does it directly impact Mark Andrews? Again, we'll find out more with a bigger sample. But as of right now, man, we have to look at the game environment for Zay. Again, he's very risky. We saw what the floor was last week. But this has the second highest game total of the week. 48.5 over under, 25.5 implied Ravens points on the road. He's got the upside to score 25 plus points. I just don't think he should be viewed as a top 15 wide receiver until he shows that those floor weeks aren't existent anymore. Wide receiver 18 is Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers, going to play the New York Giants on the road. And he's technically been the wide receiver 3 on the Chargers so far, but we've had some plays left on the field, and we have a large sample size last year of Ladd McConkey being a fantasy wide receiver 1. Look, the target competition, it is absolutely real with the Chargers, but they are number 1 in pass rate over expectation, and they are number 2 in expected wide receiver usage. The points just simply have not gone Ladd McConkey's direction so far, and Herbert, he looks elite. He looks like one of the best 5 to 7 quarterbacks on earth. The Giants, they represent a big-time bounce-back spot for McConkey this week. QJ and Keenan, no doubt, they have closed the gap on Ladd McConkey, but I'm banking on the wide receiver I think is the clear best on this team to reestablish himself. At wide receiver 19, we have Tetairoa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers going up against New England this week, and I wanted to get Tetairoa McMillan higher. He's been peppered in his first 3 games, but now the Patriots will have Christian Gonzalez make his season debut in this game, and to me, Christian Gonzalez is a big deal for Tetairoa McMillan. The Panthers, they are implied for less than 19 points on the road, and while T-Mac's volume is that of a wide receiver 1, his connection with Bryce just simply hasn't been great so far. We've seen the high points, we've seen him be fed, but Gonzalez is enough of a downgrade for me to more so consider him a fringe top 20 guy rather than a set it and forget it top 15 guy. I still like Tetairoa McMillan, but Christian Gonzalez deserves his flowers. And Jacoby Myers comes in next for me as my wide receiver 20 this week. And look, guys, I was shocked when I was making my rankings, but he has been great to start the year, and the Bears are without 3 of their top 4 corners in this game. With Jacoby Myers, you've gotten 60-plus receiving yards in each game and 26 targets through 3 games this year. Not to mention, like I said, this game environment is set up for explosion in the passing game. Bowers, he should be better moving forward. Of course, I expect Brock Bowers to be the number 1 target in this team, even though Myers has kind of operated as that so far in 3 games. And while Brock Bowers should be better moving forward, Gino clearly trusts Jacoby Myers, and Trey Tucker won't have 40 PPR points every single week. With Jacoby Myers, he gets the matchup bump here, but he should be viewed as a weekly top 30 level wide receiver if he's going to be this consistently involved moving forward. But moving on to wide receiver 21, we have Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. And Tyreek Hill's posted back-to-back weeks of 15 plus points, and the Jets are terrible against fantasy wide receivers. However, I still don't fully feel comfortable with what we've seen so far from this Dolphins passing attack. With Tua Tagovailoa, he simply hasn't looked good. Last week, threw for less than 150 yards on 34 passing attempts. I just simply need to see Tua play better to raise Tyreek Hill in my rankings. Again, low end wide receiver 2 with an anemic offense is my expectation right now. But if we do see Tua play better, Tyreek definitely has top 15 upside. At wide receiver 22, we have Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm kind of baking in that he loses some snaps with the injury. Maybe we see a little bit of a pitch count. We don't really have that information yet from Kyle Shanahan. I did mention the quote up the top that he expects Ricky Pearsall to have a better chance to play in this game. So I'm ranking him here. Again, if Ricky Pearsall plays full snaps, if there's no Jawan Jennings in this game, he's legitimately got wide receiver 1 upside. However, until we know that, I kind of more so have to have him in this low end wide receiver 2 range. And it's pretty simple why we love Ricky Pearsall. 11 targets last game, no George Kittle, and like I said, potentially no Jawan Jennings in this game. So if Ricky Pearsall is getting his normal allotment of snaps, with Brock Purdy returning, like I said, big time upside for Pearsall. And at wide receiver 23, we have Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints going to play the Buffalo Bills. And as you guys can see, only 16 implied points for the New Orleans offense this week. Like on one hand, you're getting the expected PPR point darling. Like right now with Chris Olave, he leads the league in targets. You know, he's getting force-fed the football for New Orleans. There's just simply no touchdown upside for Olave. And he's kind of giving me vibes of 2024 Wan'Dale Robinson on steroids. However, this is just simply too much volume to ignore. You can't get 10 plus targets every week and not be a top 25 level wide receiver option. He's going to PPR scam his way there, but who knows? If Chris Olave does luck his way into the end zone, we are talking about a higher ceiling. I don't expect him to score, but even if he doesn't score, he's shown about a 12 to 15 PPR point floor. But moving on to the high end wide receiver 3s. And starting off, we have Quentin Johnson, Keenan Allen at 24-25. We have Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts at 26. Matthew Golden, which we'll touch upon in a second, of the Green Bay Packers coming in at 27. Deebo Samuel at 28. And Devontae Smith as my wide receiver 29 this week. Like I said, the high-end wide receiver 3s tier. And that feels pretty disrespectful to label what Quentin Johnson and Keenan Allen have been so far this year. They have been superb. Like I mentioned with Ladd McConkey is actually currently the wide receiver 3 on this team. Quentin Johnson and Keenan Allen are both wide receiver 1s in fantasy. Again, I mentioned the usage is there. Number 2 in expected wide receiver usage. And with Quentin Johnson, you're averaging 80 yards per game and a touchdown, and he looks like he's breaking out in year 3. On Keenan Allen's end, you're getting 60 plus yards and a touchdown every single week. I do lean Quentin Johnson. You get a little bit more big play upside. You're obviously getting a younger player, but both these guys are locked and loaded options until they show otherwise. Wide receivers 24 and 25, and you can argue this is too low for both of them. A wide receiver 26, and another wide receiver I do like this week a lot is Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to be on the lookout here because the Rams, they're an objectively tough matchup for Michael Pittman. But on the flip side, man, he is the current wide receiver 13 in fantasy, and he looks so much healthier than he did last year. Last year, we know that nagging back injury really limited his production in 2024. In 2025, he looks fully healthy again. Daniel Jones, he looks like the real deal. Shane Steichen, he's been calling great offense. And Michael Pittman has operated as the clear number 1 wide receiver on this team. Josh Downs kind of been a part-time player. Tyler Warren dealing with an injury right now. And Alec Pierce has already been ruled out. So there's a real possibility Michael Pittman, power forward style wide receiver, chain moving wide receiver, that we can see 8 plus targets in this game. Again, I have to tentatively rank him. I can't fully rank him top 20 because the Rams have been no joke. But he is a deserved riser, and at worst, he should be considered a high-end wide receiver 3 until he proves otherwise. And then at wide receiver 27, one that I might have to explain myself on a little bit is Matthew Golden going up against my Dallas Cowboys. Sunday Night Football, the stage is set, and we're about to have a first-round rookie breakout. Because when I look at this, I want to be aggressive with where I'm ranking Matthew Golden this week. With Matthew Golden, he took a major uptick in his route share, up to 84% of the team routes in week 3. And in that game, 16% of the team targets and 77% of the Packers' air yards. With Matthew Golden, he can win at all 3 levels of the field, and Jordan Love clearly trusts him down the field. And now he gets the second worst defense in EPA against the pass with the Dallas Cowboys. This is the breakout spot. This is why you drafted Matthew Golden in round 6 or round 7. This is why you drafted a first-round rookie wide receiver. The opportunity is there. The talent is there. The quarterback is there. And the matchup is absolutely there. This is one of my favorite picks of the week. Give me Matthew Golden higher than 8.45 fantasy points, and I'm expecting that to look closer to 20 after the week. On top of that, this is the final pick for my flex entry. If you do pair it with the Dak Prescott gimme pick over on Underdog, you can tailor fade this entry using promo code FSC. The link is in the description of this video. But back on topic, we go to wide receiver 28 with Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers going to play the Atlanta Falcons on the road this week. There's no Jaden Daniels, and it was a down week for Deebo Samuel in week 3. However, he comes back here at wide receiver 28 with no Terry McLaurin or AJ Terrell expected in this game. But with Deebo Samuel, he had 18 targets in weeks 1 and 2, and there's a very real chance we see the entire passing game funnel through Deebo Samuel this week. And while no Jaden Daniels again does make me nervous, I think I'd be willing to give Deebo Samuel the benefit of the doubt. right now I view him as a volatile wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside the moment that Jaden Daniels comes back. Now, wide receiver 29 with Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles going to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road. Like A.J. Brown, big week 3 for Devontae Smith, and now gets a very good pass funnel going up against the Bucs. I mentioned it with A.J. Brown. The Bucs defense, teams do not want to run the football on. They do want to target them in the passing game. They have a very good front. Their secondary is a little suspect. However, like I mentioned with A.J. Brown, I'm tentative in just assuming the Eagles are going to go out there and throw the football a ton like they did in week 3. They were in that game script, down big to the Rams. They kind of had to throw the football a lot. I do think in this game, again, they're favored on the road against the Bucs. They should be able to rely upon their run game. And like I said, since week 6 of last year, only 2 games of 30-plus passing attempts. I'm less worried about A.J. Brown because he is the alpha, but if we don't see the Eagles throw the football a ton, it definitely hurts Devontae Smith a ton. But moving on to the next tier, we have the low-end wide receiver 3s. Xavier Worthy at 30, Jordan Addison at 31, Jamison Williams at 32, DJ Moore at 33, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who played on Thursday night, ranked in as my wide receiver 34. We'll start at 30, Xavier Worthy going up against Baltimore. And yes, it is his first game back. I am tentative, but Worthy has a great matchup against a vulnerable Ravens secondary. His return was much needed, given the lack of explosives we have seen from this Chiefs offense so far this year. And I expect to be ranking Xavier Worthy much higher moving forward, but I just want to see what the snaps look like. Maybe he gets a limited snap share. He is coming off a shoulder injury. I'm very curious how he's used in this game. Again, I think he's a mid-end wide receiver 3. But if he goes out there and he plays, 80+% of the routes, gets 8 targets in this game, he will be a weekly top 20 to 24 option for me. And a wide receiver making his season debut this week at 31, we have Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously missed the first 3 games with that suspension. He is back in Dublin this week going up against Pittsburgh. And like Justin Jefferson, I just think this is a very weird game environment. However, with Jordan Addison, we know what he represents. If Carson Wentz is going to look good like he did last week, Jordan Addison is the big play guy in this Vikings offense. Addison, big-time touchdown equity like he's shown in these last 2 years, and I think he jumps right back into being a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside moving forward. But moving on to wide receiver 32, we have Jamison Williams of the Detroit Lions. With Jamison Williams, he's a volatile, wide receiver 3 with big play upside, but we do have to acknowledge that he only has 13 seasonal targets. He's always going to be a startable option. Again, we love the Detroit offense, second highest implied total of the slate. We love the big play nature that they can represent. But we need to see a significant step in week-to-week volume for JMO. Otherwise, he's basically just Motown Gabe Davis. And like I said, Detroit is still implied for an incredibly high total, number 2 on the week. So when it comes down to it, it's a pass funnel matchup. While you're not getting the volume, you're hoping for the big play like we had in week 2. DJ Moore comes in at 33 going up against Las Vegas, and I mentioned just how great of a matchup it is for this Bears passing attack when I talk through Rome Odunze. With DJ Moore, you're not getting the secure volume that you're getting with Odunze, but this is the exact type of game environment that DJ Moore usually thrives in. 5+ targets in each game, and he scored a touchdown last week. And when we look at the overall, surrounding cast for the Bears, we know Rome Odunze's a stud. Colson Level was well on his way to a breakout, but he did suffer a hip injury in that game. While Luther Burden flashed, he looked good, had that big touchdown, he played less than 30% of the snaps. To me, Rome Odunze clear one on this team, but I still view DJ Moore as the number 2, at least for the time being. Sure, in the long term, does Colson Level usurp him? Does Luther Burden usurp him? Potentially, but that would be an issue come week 6, week 7. I don't think that's going to be a thing in week 4, and we know what DJ Moore can do with the ball in his hands. Expectation definitely lower with the steps Odunze has taken as the alpha, but DJ Moore still has that big play upside. And at wide receiver 34, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals going up against Seattle, and he showed a ton of grit on Thursday Night Football. We saw what he was able to do, 10 targets, 6 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown in this game. And while he struggled early on, you can tell that the mental burden he had on him that was lifted after he scored was clearly there. After he scored, you saw him have that moment to himself in the end zone. You can tell, man, this is just a young guy that really needed to get that pressure off of him. That was the monkey on his back. He scores that touchdown, and that could very well be the turning point in his year. Going into the year, I expected him to be a top 12 to 15 wide receiver. He hasn't been that so far, but maybe that was the light switch we needed to see. I think for the time being, he needs to be viewed as a top 25, top 30 wide receiver. But if nights like Thursday night show up more consistently, he still has that top 12 upside we cited coming into the season. But moving on to the final tier of my rankings for this week, and we go to the flexes. Wide receivers 35 to 40, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Keon Coleman, Darnell Mooney, DK Metcalf, and Trey Tucker rounding off the list. We'll go a little bit faster here. T. Higgins, He simply needs to prove that he's startable option to me. Like, he's been under 60 yards in each game this year, and he hasn't cracked over 15 PPR points in any single game. We know what the talent upside is with T. Higgins, but I need to see him and Jake Browning actually develop some rapport. And at least with Ja'Marr Chase, we know he can command significant volume. T. Higgins has 14 targets on the season in 3 games. Ja'Marr Chase had that in week 16 alone. And for T. Higgins, if he's going to be without Joe Burrow's touchdown equity and only command 14 targets in 3 games, that simply won't cut it for a guy that was drafted in the early 3rd round. At 36, we got Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, and he scored a touchdown in back-to-back weeks and now gets a Jets defense you can pass on. However, like I mentioned with Tyreek Hill, I am a bit worried about Tua Tagovailoa, but when you look at this stat that our friend Ron Stewart found, Waddle historically plays extremely well against the Jets, and they've been prone to explosives all year. We haven't seen many deep explosives generated for the Finns offense, but maybe this is the week that it changes. Like you guys can see in this tweet, career points per game against the Jets, 16.2. Career points per game overall, 13.7. It's clear that Waddle, for some reason in 7 games, has taken his production to the next level against New York. Keon Coleman at 37, I mean, pretty simple game against the Saints. Yes, Keon Coleman, 2 down weeks in a row, but we saw what the upside looks like in week 1, and Buffalo is implied for a slate leading 32 points. James Cook, Josh Allen, we know the touchdown equity they have on this team, but Keon Coleman can create big plays at the catch point, and he has 25% of the seasonal end zone targets, so if Josh Allen throws a touchdown or 2, Keon Coleman could very well be on the receiving end. 38, Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons going to play Washington. He had 11 targets against Carolina in week 3 and now gets this Commanders defense up next. And it's clear with Michael Penix, he trusts him in this offense. And hopefully we see a return of the deep ball that Darnell Mooney thrived on in 2024. However, until we see some more efficiency, I cannot rank Darnell Mooney higher than 38. But I do think there's big upside as he gets healthier from that shoulder injury. At 39 is DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against Minnesota, and he has only 40-plus receiving yards in 1 of his 3 games this year. With DK Metcalf, he has been a touchdown merchant for the Steelers offense, and he only has 17 targets and 135 receiving yards in 3 games. Sure, he's got big-time touchdown equity, but we have a problem if he doesn't hit pay dirt. With DK Metcalf, this volume is not going to cut it. The fact that ECR has DK Metcalf as the wide receiver 29, when we've had literal wide receivers with more yards in one singular game than he has all year, I don't get it, man. Like, I'm going to rank him in the top 40 because he's got touchdown upside, but man, the volume just simply is not good enough. And you can make the case this week that Trey Tucker should straight up be ahead of DK Metcalf. Going up against Chicago, mention their deficiencies on defense, and Trey Tucker in the last 2 weeks has commanded 17 targets. He's a full-time player for the Raiders, and week 3 showed that he is a legit ceiling in this offense. And while he's a bit volatile as the 3rd weapon for this Raiders offense, he has plenty of upside, like he showed in week 3, to be a big-time flex option. He's a little bit volatile, he's a little bit risky, but I've said that about literally every wide receiver in this range. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Also, I mentioned my pick'em entry for this week. Last week's entry on this video actually ended up hitting. We do see from last week, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Rome Odunze, the Russell Wilson gimme pick, and Jamison Williams all ended up hitting. We ended up making that profit. And like I said, I mentioned the entry on today's video. We like Puka Nacua, we like Rome Odunze, we like Matthew Golden, and we like the lower on Ja'Marr Chase. You go and pair that with that Dak gimme pick and tailor fade this entry with promo code FSC. The link is in the description. But with that being said, good luck in your matchups. Let's secure the W's. Let's hope we make these right wide receiver decisions. And take care, baby.